damn it, I'm sick of being quiet and I just want to be loud. And I want everyone in the room to hear what I'm doing.
LEILA, it's good to see you again. It's always nice to talk to one of my favorite people in the world of metal or music, because we're going far outside the realms of metal, obviously, when we talk about your solo work. How are you doing? It's been a minute since we spoke last, so how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing okay, thankfully. It's been very busy. This album was just a mammoth. I mean, just, we'll get into the nitty gritty, but it just like took all of me, you know, for months and months. And it just, I'm very proud of it. And, but yeah, it was a lot of work.
Yeah. You should be proud of it because it's a really cool album. It's, I obviously had a chance to listen to the full thing already. What a trip you take us on this time. It's a really cool album. Before we go into the album specifics, like, we have yourself, like a lot of people know you from several of the many extreme metal bands that you are part of or were part of at some point. Yourself, and then we look at people like Mortis and Die Catafalque and Ishan. Like, what is it that attracts extreme metal artists so much to the world of the avant-garde and ambient? What is behind all of that? What's your theory on that?
I think, you know, if you really think about it, it's always been there. Like the avant-garde, I mean, I think metal came from avant-garde. I mean, avant-garde has a history, huge history. Whether you're talking about like avant jazz, like even when Miles Davis got all crazy, and you know, like John Coltrane and all that stuff, like you can draw lines from all that stuff, and like Mahavishnu Orchestra and just all the crazy jazz stuff out there through metal. And I think a lot of metalheads, even back in the early days, were listening to that stuff and were influenced by it. So there's sort of like this, just, you know, the virtuosic aspects of it, right? Like, sure, you have to really technically know what you're doing, like you do with metal. And so there's just so much crossover there. And then ambient stuff, I mean, it's like, it's not really like one genre, right? There's like so many things. There's like the dark black ambient stuff and the droney stuff, and you know, and that also has its history, I think, even before metal got off the ground as well. And I think a lot of metal musicians, they're just adventurous, you know, they just want to do something that's extreme, like whatever type of extreme it is, whether it's you know, playing lots of notes or like droning on something for an hour or whatever. It's extreme, right? Like the vocals are extreme. Like, it's not easy listening. It's not for people who listen to music passively. So it takes a lot out of the listener and the performer, I guess.
If we put this side by side with your previous solo album, which was way more ambient and more soundscapey than this album is, which is maybe already a perfect example of like the world of avant-garde, by its definition, has to be a roller coaster. You cannot have the same thing over and over again. Are these two albums, from a storytelling perspective, still very related? Then the reason why I ask is that the previous album was like, you know, a journey through like a downward spiral, addiction of in a vague description of the word, was like a cause or accelerator of that. And then on the second half, I remember, you know, the eye emerges, comes out on it, but in a deeply uncomfortable state, but a bit of a rebirth, if you will. And then we go to this album where, like, when I listen to it, it's like almost like I get the idea of like dealing with the aftermath of all of that. Almost like there feels like a post-apocalyptic side to this album, if you will. Is there any truth to that, or am I just like having fun with drawing, connecting dots?
I think that, I love these interviews because like sometimes whoever I'm talking to will just have this thing that I never thought of, which I didn't even like think to tie it to Fantasiae, the album before, that it's sort of like the coming out, like the aftermath of that. And that is so, I can see how true that could be, that is such a possibility. I think where I was going with it, like, well, Fantasiae, it was such a like philosophical record in a lot of ways. Like it delved inward, right? It was very introspective. Wrote it in the deep pandemic days, where there's just a lot of isolation. And this album is like, the world's a fucking mess, and let's talk about it. It's a little more confrontational. It reflects more outward than inward. There are very strong war themes, all the wars going on in the world that we're hearing about, and ones that are trying to be covered up. And, so it's a little more like, even musically, it's very, a little more aggressive, more rhythmic. And, it speaks to that sort of that conflict that, that I don't know about your world, but in my world, it's just like day after day, like conflict. And so I needed to get all of this out. It was just overflowing.
Yeah. It almost feels like it's a story set in like a wasteland destroyed by everything, if you will. But then depending on the song, like, sometimes it feels like we're getting a glimmer of hope, but then sometimes the rug gets pulled underneath our feet, if you will. Like, is there a glimmer of hope to this album, or is there only just kind of like the maybe? No, not really. It's a fucked up place.
I think there's both. Really, there are glimmers of hope for sure. It's more like asking the questions about what is he really capable of, both in the good and the bad, right? Like, will humans always be, no matter what, like, is war just a part of who we are? And do we need to accept that? Or should we not accept it? Like, can we rise above that? But we haven't. But whether we haven't doesn't mean we never will. I mean, that's a little optimistic, but also, like, time on this planet is diminishing, right? So we're not going to be here forever. Like, humans are part of a long, like a microscopic part of all of evolution. And I mean, I can imagine a post-human world, and so is it even going to matter? Like, so the album really asks those questions, and it's just the things that drive me crazy, that keep me up at night.
Do you get, because you do get, I know that you have fans of your solo stuff and you've got fans of the bands, but because you are, in so many different genres, you get people from traditional non-avant-garde genres trying you out and listening to you and giving feedback on your music. Like, do you feel like your music, your solo music, starts conversations predominantly with people that are like deep in that avant-garde artistic underground, or do you get some really cool reactions from people that, like myself, I would say, like, traditionally you're not necessarily an avant-garde music listener first, more of a rock music listener first, but I'm super open to what you're doing. Like, how do you see different reactions from those crowds?
Oh yeah, I think so. But then you have people that like all of it, and they're they're really into all of it. I would say they're more of a minority, but here's the thing about my fan base, which is strange, is that my solo fans, like, they're all over the world, and they're like just on the internet mostly. Yeah. But live, when I tour or play a festival or whatever it is I get involved with, I feel like most of the live offers that I get are because I'm in Vastum, and so most often a lot of those festivals, with some exceptions, are metal fests, right?
Yeah.
Or opening for a metal band or something like that. And so totally different reactions and responses. So the people that are just living on the internet and writing to me and asking me questions, like, they could be getting very deep and philosophical. So it just really depends. And so what I was getting at with the live thing, it taps into sort of this newer sound that I've been, making on this record, is really came from a practical choice to be louder. So doing my older ambient stuff at a metal show was very challenging because the venues are not set up for quiet music. I mean, I have played a lot of venues in the experimental art world. Lots of those venues, they're like sit-down events. They're in these quiet, some of them are art galleries, some of them are just like these nonprofit kind of spaces with these nice giant projection screens and whatnot. And it caters to quiet music. You don't have like a bar right next to the stage, or people, glasses clinking and drunk people talking. So when I play, so, which is cool. So that's a really good space. And I've learned to sort of adapt to the space. And, but damn it, I'm sick of being quiet, and I just want to be loud. And I want everyone in the room to hear what I'm doing. And so that was a big factor in making this album.
When we spoke about your last album, I agree with you. Like, that, like, it sounds like that would come to life beautifully in like some sort of, quiet setting where art of whatever kind, visual art is supporting the story, if you will. When I listen to this album, I, like, the entire time listening to this, I'm like, oh, I hope that one day you, either yourself or let in another, somebody that is a really master of modern dance choreography, build a dance performance studio. It's like a modern dance performance. It just, like, when I heard the album, it was just like, it felt like so, I feel like screens with images wouldn't do it justice in a way. I prefer to have a completely dark black setting with just a few people in a minimalist outfit. Bring those emotions to life that way. Is that something that's on your mind at all, or is this wishful thinking?
This is so uncanny. I just performed at the Arab American National Museum last weekend in Michigan, and so that was a beautiful space. Everybody's quiet, you can hear a pin drop kind of thing. And I was talking to some of the artists that are affiliated with the museum, and one of them was doing a residency there, about how I would love to get some dancers to perform with. And they said, oh, of course, like, that just belongs to your live show. And so I've been thinking for months about how to make my live show more multimedia, just more interdisciplinary. And because really, like, just the audio and just the flat visual, it's getting old, and it needs something more. So there are plans in the works. So it's interesting that you just brought that up.
Yeah, no, and I think part of it is also that I really like the sound of this album, and specifically, like, I think the mix is done really, really well. It's both super clear, but it's kind of in a way, and I mean this as a positive thing, it often sounds a little underproduced in a way that the music or the instrument that has the spotlight at certain times, whether that is an acoustic guitar or whether that's a horn or what have you, they feel very live. And so when I listened to the album, it kind of felt like I am somewhere listening to this music being performed live, where soundscapes are the opposite of that often, where it all kind of has to come together into one, sea of sound, if you will. Was it finding the right tone for all of these songs? Because there's a lot going on. You already mentioned it earlier that this took a lot out of you and it was a lot of work. Was it then also really hard, to get that specific? Did you have a very clear vision of the tone that you wanted to have for the album?
Not entirely. Not when I was making it. I wasn't sure where it was going to go.
Okay.
And which is unusual, because in the past I have the clearest vision from the get-go when I started. The album is going to be this.
Right.
This was a lot more exploratory, and I have 6 guest musicians on the album, right? And now for some of those musicians, I wrote their parts out note for note, and they just recorded and played it, and it was great.
Yeah.
But then say Derek Vella from Tomb Mold, who does a guitar solo on it.
Yeah.
I didn't tell him what to play. I said, D Phrygian and knock yourself out. Just do what you would do.
How hard, and just for interrupt you real quick on that, how hard is that to do? Because, most multi-instrumental solo artists that release a solo album that I speak to would have a hard time letting go of the reins to that extent. Is that hard for you as well? It's something that is easier for you now versus some years ago?
Well, I've had guests on my records, starting with the second record. I've had, in fact, some of the people that are on this record are on the second record. But the people I picked, I'm not going to give up over the thing, but I specifically picked people who I absolutely trust their musicianship, and some of them are people I've known for many years, and we've had bands together, and I know their tone, I know their sound. Derek's a newer friend. Now he came out with a solo album this past year, and he shared it with me before it came out. And I thought, I can hear something of this element on the new record. And so I knew I had a general idea of what he would do. So it wasn't completely well, I have no idea what he's going to do. So there was that. And the hardest control piece to give up in this whole thing was letting someone else mix the record. That was a hurdle that took some time, but glad I did it, because I was getting in way over my head with all these tracks, and like you said, a lot of it was very live sounding, there are live hand drums on it, and the acoustic guitar and the cello, violin, viola, all of that, and so it was just way out of my scope to mix it myself. I would say my engineering skills are rudimentary at best. Definitely fine for a very basic minimal ambient album. But what I was trying to pull off was was a lot more. So I was really happy to have Sammy Fielding come in and do his magic. So, and I thought he did great. So this show at the Arab American Museum, I did alone, which was like crazy because I was like, how am I going to pull this off alone?
Right.
But yeah, it was some acrobatic stuff going back and forth between the trumpet and the synths and the vocals. Like, I'd say 95% of the harmonies I did live at the show. So I used harmonizers. But it's very flexible. Like the drummer on the album would love to accompany me for any show that like I could fly him out for, or local show or whatever. Gregory Hagen, my partner, is violist on the record, and we've actually had performed together as a duo in the past, so I can definitely see him accompanying me on the viola parts, especially on the first and last song. And so drums, viola, maybe some maybe some dancers.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
We need to see you play at Roadburn or something like that with like a full.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Full production. Awesome. Now that you mentioned that show in the Arab American Museum, I wanted to ask you, because the very first time that you and I spoke was part of, a project around International Women's Day, and I already shared about some obstacles you had to overcome in the industry and all that kind of good stuff. And I'm not going to bore you with questions right now about like, hey, being a woman in metal, how hard is that? We've had that conversation. With your own, Arab cultural roots, if you will. I grew up in Belgium, a country that had lots of, people from Moroccan descent, Turkish descent, and so on. Very few of those people active in the world of extreme music in any way that you could think of. And the few that were had to overcome a lot of bias from their own, loved ones and immediate circle. How has that been for you, being a quite prominent person in the world of extreme music? How has that been, and how was that experience playing in that museum of all places?
Oh yeah, that's a whole novel right there.
And can you answer that in like 30 seconds, please?
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, so I'm culturally mixed, right? Like my dad's family's from Egypt, my mom's family is like Irish American, Catholic, what have you. And so for the longest time I was just seen as like a white American, like in the way that like seen as white. I mean, this is a whole other topic, like are Arabs white, or are Jews white, etc.
Yeah.
It's a similar kind of thing. So for like many years, no one really thought of me like I was different, but like my ethnicity wasn't really talked about. Like,
right.
Like I'm just so racially ambiguous that like I could fall into multiple categories. Yeah. And so, but recently in the past couple of years, I've become part of this local community of artists here who are Arabs, Swana, Middle Eastern artists who are really doing a lot to have these events, these artist residencies who at these different museums or nonprofit places. I did another one in Philadelphia, put on by the same group, Arab Amp, they're called, back in February, and it's just been like, where have all you people been my whole life? So it's been an amazing experience. And these are a group of really like deep, thoughtful, community oriented, interdisciplinary. They've got music, art, dance, connections, and that's really opened up my world in many ways.
Seeing some more, I hate to label it exotic or ethnic, but I'm just going to use it as a lack of a better word right now, elements in this album compared to the previous album that explored that rediscovery, if you will, or becoming part of that group over the last few years that must have influenced this album. And should we then also expect you to see, or should we expect you to explore those sides even more when you're thinking about what's next? Or are you still in the like, hey, I just finished this album, I don't want to think about what's next, it was too much already?
Oh no, I'm always thinking about what's next, definitely. I'd say as opposed to exotic, I think there are a lot of folk elements that are actually very traditional. And depending on who's listening to the album, they'll have a different perspective. So I have a younger sister who's Egyptian, Yemeni, Malay is her background. She listened to parts of this album that I would consider to be more of the Arabic influence.
Right.
And she didn't hear that at all. She said, "Wow,
interesting.
This is so Nordic sounding and Nordic and Celtic." But she's right, because I have all of that in my blood too, and
right.
That plays a big part in my music. So I'd say, and there's just so much crossover with even Arabic and Celtic music, and the tonalities and some of the scales even, or Western Asia and other parts of Asia. There's just so much blending, or common history, that I think I was sort of tapping more into that.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think a lot of those, speaking with for the album, ever since October 7th, my mind has just sort of been in this part of the world, and thinking about war and thinking about conflict and what's possible or not. I have days where I'm just just in complete nihilistic mode, and there's there's some of that on the record too, some nihilism there.
Yeah. Well, we spoke about the glimmer of hope on the album as well, to balance out all the nihilism, and maybe that glimmer of hope is a reminder that no matter where we all come from, there's so many similarities in our cultures and what we gravitate towards. LEILA, I really, really hope to see you play this music live. And I'm super excited for this album. I think it's a really, really cool album. It's so unique and so different than anything else that we get to hear. Thank you so much for letting me, ask all these annoying questions, and opening the door to all of us. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you too. You asked great questions, by the way. Thanks again.
You are awesome for watching this video. Click right here to see more content like it, and subscribe to the channel.